Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So as you can see today, I am filming from my car, and that is because the topic of today's video is really personal, so I just felt it would be a bit more comfortable for me to film from a slightly more secluded spot. So yeah, let's just get into it. Today's video is going to be about my experience as an Indian American. I wanted to make this video for the longest time, because I haven't seen too much of this content on YouTube. In fact, when I go into the YouTube search bar and type Indian American experience, I've gotten less than 5 search results pop up. So it feels exciting to be able to contribute to a conversation that I feel like isn't super saturated with content on this platform already. And I know that there are tons of TikTok videos on the subject of being like a first or second gen immigrant living in the US, but given how nuanced and broad this topic is, I just felt that a long form video would probably do it the most justice. So my plan is to not just tell the story of my life, but instead I've picked a few big topics that I would love to share my experiences on and shed some light on as well. Another reason why I wanted to do this is because, as corny as it sounds, I remember how I felt when I would watch like Lily Singh's videos back in the day, or Hasan Minhaj's Netflix special, Homecoming King, and how the things that they would touch on in their content would resonate with me so deeply, and how that would just make me feel validated and seen. So hopefully parts of this are relatable, or at the very least, interesting to hear about. And yeah, let's just get started with umbrella topic number 1. So this is one of those things that I haven't really heard anyone from the Indian American community speak about openly in popular media. I think I should just cut to the chase by playing some clips that will illustrate my point, hopefully. So as you can see right here, I'm just chatting with my dad. Completely normal, right? Until... We'll be back soon.
You guys don't know how many times I walked up and down.
You mean in the mornings?
Mornings, afternoons.
Like this trip, or just in general?
This trip.
We'll be back soon, right, Dad?
We'll be back very soon, guys.
So yes, TLDR, I have a pretty distinct Indian accent around my family and generally around people who also speak that way. To provide some context, I was born in the US, lived right here in Atlanta until I was 5 or 6, and then moved to India once the economy crashed, but mostly to get cultured and be close to family. And somehow I ended up living there for almost a decade. When you're in a country for that long, and you move at such a young and impressionable age, it's completely normal for you to pick up on the lifestyle, habits, and tendencies of the people around you, which is exactly what happened to me. Everyone I interacted with, family, friends, teachers, they all spoke a certain way, and so eventually I started to as well, and speaking with an Indian accent kind of became my default. When this started getting confusing, and when I think the code switching sort of began, is when I transferred to an international school in 5th grade, and suddenly a lot of my classmates were NRIs who had just emigrated from America. For some reason, when I spoke to them, I was very comfortably able to switch to a more westernized or American accent. And all I really meant by this is I wouldn't roll my R's as much, and my pronunciation of certain consonant sounds would be a lot softer, if that makes sense. For example, saying H instead of hetch. But I couldn't channel that same way of speaking around my family. It's kind of like once you establish a way of speaking with someone, you kind of can't reverse it or go back. And I have also received several comments and stares from people who have heard me code switch. In India, when someone who was used to hearing me speak with an Indian accent heard me speak with an American accent, they'd always be like, wow, are you trying to not be Indian? And then when I moved back to the US and I had friends who'd hear me speak to my parents on the phone, they'd be like, are you putting on an Indian accent for your parents right now? And it was always so uncomfortable to have to deal with, and I only knew like 1 or 2 other people going through this exact same thing. So it felt pretty isolating, and it was almost as if I needed to hide parts of myself from people. There's a story I read in college called The Quarter, and one of the main themes of it is the narrator's struggle to marry both the eastern and western parts of his identity. Like, he so badly wants one straightforward, kind of clearly defined means of identifying who he is, but he's never able to get that because he can't neglect either part of who he is. And I feel like that has just been the eternal quest / struggle for me for a good chunk of my life, because I feel so closely connected to both cultures, but sometimes it's just hard to bridge the gap or even fuse both, even with respect to my communication style. It's always felt as if I have to pick one or the other. I guess if I had to wrap this up by saying anything about code switching, because I do understand it can be pretty jarring for a lot of people to just see someone out of context like that. Even I'm overwhelmed sometimes thinking about how much I've had to do it. But what I'll say is this: code switching, at least from my experience, has never ever been done to seem disingenuous or stand out. In fact, it's the complete opposite. You do it because you want to fit in and feel like you belong and can relate to other people. But I don't know, I'm 23 and still trying to navigate this, and that is where I stand with that. But I think it's time we move on to topic number 2. When I look back at my life when I'm 70 and I think back at the things I did when I was in my 20s, if I ever go, wow, that was super ballsy of me, I will for sure be referring to this moment. Just the fact that I am this terrified of speaking about this should sum up the entire subtopic. But no, let's for real try to dissect this. I think a good place to start is with the representations of love that I saw in my family, and that primarily came in the form of arranged marriages. Almost everyone I'm related to has had an arranged marriage, and in case you don't know what it consists of, let me just give you the 411 on arranged marriages real quick. Alright guys, welcome to Arranged Marriage 101, Tamil Brahmin edition. A quick disclaimer that this is the only rendition of consensual arranged marriage that I've learned the process behind and watched members of my family go through. And it's also worth mentioning that I'll mainly be speaking from the POV of the bride-to-be and her family. Basically, back in the day, when a girl from a Tambaram household reached a certain age that was deemed by her folks as marriable, her family would look for suitors and potential mates via advertising about her in a newspaper. Back then in India, and even now I bet, newspapers have a matrimonial column where people could submit little ads of themselves describing who they are and what kind of partner they're looking for. In my mom's case, I believe they touched on her age, the fact that she was college educated, and believe it or not, her skin tone, which she later tells me was classified as wheatish. Then, interested grooms-to-be and their families would send letters to the families of women they were interested in to ask to see pictures, and most importantly, inquire about astrological signs. Once the couple was pronounced to be a match by an astrologer, and if the families felt comfortable moving forward with each other, an engagement would take place and eventually lead to a marriage. It is worth noting that this process has obviously modernized a bit since my mom and dad's time, because people are clearly moving away from print media and are leaning more towards online matrimonial sites. I'm fairly certain that my parents never dated other people growing up, either because they were too scared to or didn't see it as necessary, but either way, they always viewed marriage as a union of two families as opposed to a union of two individuals, which I think is kind of the opposite of how we're wired to think about it in America or the West. So how did this affect me? I think it manifested itself in some pretty weird ways. I grew up terrified of putting myself out there. In middle or high school, when I had a crush on someone, I was so terrified of anyone finding out, even my friends. And even kind of moving into college, when I became a bit more assured and less overwhelmed about all of this, I would still always feel like this pang of guilt anytime I liked someone or maybe wanted to date someone. I know it's totally normal to feel uncomfortable about the idea of your parents finding out about this side of your life, but for me it was always a debilitating, anxiety-inducing level of fear. I literally have messages I sent to my friends paranoid that my family might find out that I hung out with someone that I liked, just liked, not even dated, God forbid dated. And I should also preface this by saying that I am by nature a very kind of anxious, overwhelmed person. But the point I'm trying to make is, given how rigid my family cultural values are, it never felt like there was a safe space for me to explore this part of adulthood comfortably, or much less even talk to my parents about it. Because even though it might seem like stupid or unnecessary to them, it is a very real, legitimate part of growing up. I also want to touch on this notion that we have in the South Indian community about your dating life being representative of your purity. It's so stupid and I hate that it exists, but I know for a fact that our community openly chastises the idea of intimacy in romantic relationships. Like in Western culture, intimacy is seen as a beautiful way for couples to come closer together, or even as an individual, sex is seen as empowering, and when initiated and done consensually is fun and helps you learn about yourself and adds value to your life. But in the Indian community, is painted out to be this unforgivable deed, and if you're a woman, removes value from who you are. It's just so funny how every Indian movie I've ever watched, or every Tamil song that I've ever heard my family singing at home, at their core are always love stories, very passionate love stories at that. And I don't know, I just think it's kind of interesting how a culture and entertainment industry that profits off of and glamorizes romance so much is also the same culture that kind of looks down on it and is dismissive of it. Which is why I also think it's so badass that there's at least some representation of South Indian women on TV, in Western media specifically, that are openly boy crazy or want to be perceived as sexual, fearlessly so, which I think is a whole other topic that I would love to do a video on later. And obviously not every Indian family has such traditional values. In fact, I know a lot of Indian Americans who kind of were brought up here that are pretty open to the idea of sharing details of their dating lives with their parents, and they know that it'll be fine, which is awesome for them. That's a huge win for them. And I also do believe that, at least I hope, that this is something that will evolve for the better over time as newer generations come in and normalize the idea of dating more and more. But for now, I still feel like there's a good number of us that are trapped in this super outdated old generation mentality that dating or being attracted to someone is impure, or maybe takes away your innocence, and will always be connoted with feelings of guilt and shame, which sucks. But speaking of outdated old school mentalities, so this is my last topic of discussion, and probably the one that's most relevant to my life right now as a budding young professional and she who is stepping into womanhood. First off, full credit for this topic goes to my friends Jennifer and Evelyn. Love you guys. We were having a conversation about the first/second generation immigrant experience in the US, specifically family behavior in foreign households and the idea of breaking generational cycles, which was super interesting to talk about. And in the midst of that, we somehow arrived at this idea of having to unlearn outdated ways of thinking and the need to reset to keep up with the current social or cultural climate, which to me is such a necessary conversation for everyone to have with themselves, but even more important for people that maybe come from more traditional or orthodox cultures. So I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, because this is something that I'm truly just starting to reflect on and try to think critically about. But here are some ways that I have tried to practice this in my own life and have been encouraged and supported by other people to practice it as well. The number one example of this that comes to mind is standing up for yourself and asking for better. So when I landed my first job after college, I was initially offered a salary that I felt was slightly on the lower side and that I thought could be revised a little bit. And I remember when I discussed this at home, my dad was like, "You want to negotiate salary? If I were you, I would just accept this. You know, you'll climb the ladder eventually, so just focus on locking this down." And I was like, no, for my skills and qualifications, I feel like I deserve something slightly higher. And I remember being so on edge when I requested the salary revision, because I was like, wow, if my dad, who's been in the corporate world for so many years now, if even he is kind of apprehensive about this, then I probably have a reason to worry then, don't I? And it all ended up working out fine, which I'm so grateful for. But it really got me thinking, like, man, I really almost had my dad talking me out of asking for more money. And that made me think about something that I think is worth mentioning, which is that I think for many children of immigrants, our parents moved here without a job. I know my dad did, and had to work really hard to find something once he got here. So to them, they probably just felt lucky to have even landed something in the first place. To them, it was probably like, don't even bother thinking of more money or anything right now. Like, you should feel privileged that you even have something. And it's super unfortunate that their job security felt volatile to the point where they maybe felt like they couldn't have asked for better until way down the line in their careers. That honestly makes me sad. But also, as my friend was saying, they moved to America so that we could have the best lives and the most fulfilling careers possible. So of course we're only gonna settle for the best that we can get. And on the topic of money, another kind of immigrant mentality that I'm trying to let go of more and more is the idea of saving up as much as possible and holding on to every single cent you earn, aka not really having much of a work-life balance due to being frugal, which again, I think for the older generation might circle back to them doing what was most sensible at the time for their families and maybe to build generational wealth. But I'm very grateful that my parents encouraged me early on to not make chasing the bag my sole life priority. They actively advised me against pursuing like a STEM career because they knew that I didn't have an interest or an aptitude for it. They also always encouraged me to let my imagination run wild, chase any dreams I had, and enjoy life and be happy. And even still, with all that support, I sometimes feel bad when I splurge on activities or go out with people because I think of my parents and the fact that maybe they didn't get to experience as much in their 20s and didn't have this kind of freedom and had to sacrifice so much to give me this life, my mom especially. But I know the entire point of them going through all of that was for us to be happy and for us to be able to build the lives that we want for ourselves, aka living our American dream. I think it's a slow burning process to come to terms with that reality, but recognizing and maybe starting to let go of some of those feelings that can hold you back feels like a good first step. So onwards and upwards. And on that slightly melancholic note, I think I'm gonna call it here. I've probably been going on for way too long already. Again, I just want to reiterate that this is in no way representative of the entire Indian American community, or even that this video somehow encapsulates my entire experience as an Indian American. Maybe I'll make a part 2 because there's honestly so much I could talk about. But for now, I hope you're all staying healthy and happy. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking the time to listen. I so appreciate it. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.